Hey, all you experts out there, this is the Monetize Your Expertise podcast, where we show you how to use your skills to pay the bills. Have you ever wanted to create a business that positions you as the industry leader and go-to expert? Join me every week to hear from amazing leaders and entrepreneurs who have successfully refined their skills in order to become experts and create extremely profitable knowledge businesses. To find all of the links and tools mentioned in this episode, just go to myepodcast.com. I'm your host, Grant Weherley, the online course guy, helping you every week to monetize your expertise. Welcome back to this special series of episodes documenting a real-life course launch as I work through it. In the past episodes, we talked about the phase 1 and phase 2 of this kind of launch. The first, going from nothing through validating and pre-selling your course, and then in phase 2, how you actually build out and continue to refine your product. Now it's time for phase 3. So that your course is done, now it's time to do a serious relaunch, which I'm actually currently in the middle of. So let's talk about that. As I was gearing up for this, I went through a lot of potential strategies and ideas, and some of them I ended up going with, others I dropped for now for the sake of focus. So here are some strategies that I liked and thought about, but actually did not end up going with yet. So number 1 is creating a viral quiz or giveaway. This is really effective. It's worked for a lot of brands. It's something that I really like the concept of. I haven't experimented with it too much, and I'm excited to do that at a later date, but did not go with that for the time being. Another one was heavily building my email list further in the sake of preparation for the relaunch. Another one was setting up a really complicated sales funnel that I was really excited about in preparation for the webinar, but didn't go with that. And then finally, also running a contest through this podcast to build the email list dramatically in order to then market the webinar to later. So for all of these, they're great. They're really effective, great strategies. But as I mentioned in the previous episodes about this kind of course launch process, timelines are key in a launch. And these sort of ended up falling into the category of unnecessary luxuries that would just delay things. So for the sake of focus, put those on hold for now. So here's the strategy that I actually went with for this relaunch process. So the core part of this strategy is to focus heavily on the webinar to kick off the relaunch of the product. So this included some minor list building as a way of testing who I should run ads to for the product. So I was trying to incorporate Facebook advertising directly to the webinar as a sort of an integral approach to making sure I got enough people on the webinar. And so before doing that directly, I needed to test which audiences would be most receptive to this type of topic. So I think it was 9 different audiences that I was testing. I wasn't sending them to a webinar registration page. Basically what I was doing was giving them ads for a free resource, 24 expert tools, free download, and seeing which audience was most receptive to that in terms of click-through rates and different metrics to see what worked the most. Another major strategy and integral part of this approach was I got set up with several people to promote the webinar alongside me, including mentions in a guest interview, came out recently on the Beastly Gentleman podcast. I had an email sequence go out to Dan O'Donnell's audience, he's got a massive audience of like 1 million people on Facebook and a 16,000 person email list, positive thinking. And also Rob Cubbin and a couple other people that sort of spread the word a bit, and it actually helped quite a bit. And the last 2 core parts of this strategy was just really killing it on the webinar and having that be a really strong focus to do a great job with that. And also offering a very limited, very high value offer to people who are on the call, a way of working with me one-on-one while also being a member of the program. And then finally, very careful follow-up with people to get them on the phone if they didn't buy from the webinar, to just get that one-on-one interaction, learn more about what maybe didn't resonate with them or maybe why they aren't a good fit. And also, I fully expect, I haven't actually got to this last phase yet, I fully expect that from those conversations, some of them will then actually become customers, because I find a lot of times people, if they have that hesitation, but then once you talk to them one-on-one, then they like you, they trust you, they feel better about going forward with your product or service. So currently, at the time of the recording of this episode, the webinar is in a couple days, and so I'll record another update episode detailing how everything went. But there were a lot of interesting events sort of in the middle of this relaunch, which warranted a standalone episode in the middle of this launch. So basically right now, the stage I'm at of the strategy I just listed, I've gone through everything except the webinar hasn't happened yet, and then the follow-up to the webinar has also not happened yet. So those are the last two key things which will be happening in the next couple days. There were also a lot of important changes that I did have to make alongside the launch, and some of these were probably ill-advised to try and do simultaneously alongside of a launch. Number one of those was I actually combined my different brands and domains into one, which caused a lot of problems. I switched hosting providers, which was, all this stuff was good, but also caused a lot of problems. I updated the course, adding some things, and also moving the platform it was hosted on. And finally, I also got set up with a better email provider that included marketing automation. So I ended up going with ActiveCampaign. Big fan so far, highly recommended. But yeah, all of those things actually caused a lot of problems, even though they, at the end of the day, were quite worth it. So here are some related challenges and lessons learned from the strategy itself, and also from some of those changes that I made while I was going through that launch. So number one, I had a lot of domain and hosting problems at various points throughout the launch, just because I was moving things, combining domains, and so this led to my websites going down. Some of the websites broke several times actually, and this was sometimes due to hosting problems, sometimes due to domain problems, sometimes due to course platform problems, because I was also moving that as well. And so basically, this was kind of stupid to do in the middle of the launch, or actually sort of on the front end of the launch. It probably would have been smarter to separate the two, get that taken care of, and then go on to the launch, because it was just ending up, I was juggling things and kind of worried about tech issues getting sorted out in time for various milestones of the launch. So big lesson learned. And actually, just funnily enough, a couple hours ago, I found out one of my sites also just broke again before recording this. So all of this is, by the way, why I'm switching to a more reliable provider in terms of the course platform and hosting, etc. But it's caused a lot of transition problems. And, it's the nature of online business at the end of the day. Another major challenge was that, as I mentioned before, a core part of my strategy was using Facebook advertising to ensure, sort of as a backup, that I got enough people on the webinar. But the problem was it was really difficult to target the right types of audiences, to get them to interact with my advertising for a good price. So basically the goal was $1 per click, but actually I had trouble getting my ads to run for anything less than about $2 or $1.80 per click. Now that's really bad just in terms of ROI and scalability. It's almost double what the goal was. And so this actually caused me to focus more on the manual hustle instead of running ads and automatically building that email list and that registration group. But this actually led to a lot of important and useful lessons learned, which I'll share with you shortly. Another major challenge was that my email provider blocked me twice when I was mailing through Dan's list. And the reason for that was that it was basically the first time he started to mail for this type of thing. And it caused some problems, even though it was very legitimate. It was basically switching email providers and then mailing out for an offer right away to not a new list, but like a new list on a different platform, I guess. And so, yeah, that was kind of a challenge as well. And then also, finally, the payment processor for my course was actually quite close to blocking me, because I also switched payment processors in preparation for the launch to something more professional. So basically, lots of technical glitches and stuff, and I think this is just the nature of any kind of course launch or product launch or anything complicated that you're building, because you got a lot of things going on, some things break, just stuff happens, and you got to deal with it at the end of the day. And so here are 5 really important lessons learned as a result of those challenges. And the first is really key, that it's really hard to put out technical fires yourself, and it's definitely not advisable. I actually looked very hard for a good web guy for this kind of thing in preparation for the launch, but I actually didn't find a very good fit. So I've got some people on my team who do this, but they're not like the dedicated technical person. But I actually regret, even though I tried to, I regret not looking harder, because I know how to do most of it, but it's really stressful to deal with those kinds of problems while you're also putting together the launch and all the content. It's just a lot to deal with. And so it's really important to have some technical support, and ideally dedicated technical support, because, I've got people on my team who do the tech stuff sometimes, but they're not dedicated for that. And that's, I think, a key difference. Number 2 is that one thing which I tried later, again, after the ads, basically the ads didn't really work at all, aside from some minor retargeting. So one thing, coordinating with a person that I'm getting some advice on from the Facebook marketing side of things, he encouraged me to create a Facebook event page for the actual webinar and sort of distribute it and share it that way. And that worked insanely well. I don't think I've ever actually seen somebody else do that, but it was a great idea. It worked so well. I never would have thought of that. This actually leads to some other lessons learned, but taking an online event like a webinar and turning it into a Facebook event, it just makes it very easy to share. I think it's much less likely people will view it as spam because you're not taking somebody to something that looks like an internet marketing page. It's just a Facebook event. And so, yeah, I was able to share it in all these event-based Facebook groups, and people just jumped on it really, really quick. And the funny thing is this actually worked much better than running basically a Facebook ad to the same types of people versus sharing the Facebook event. And honestly, the text was basically the same, the image was basically the same, but it was just a different type of post, and it worked that much better. So really interesting lesson learned there as well. Number 3 is that if you're mailing out to an audience of somebody else's and they're not used to receiving these kinds of invitations to like a webinar, for example, definitely warm them up first. So I tested this because I thought this might be a problem because I was taking sort of a hand-on approach with Dan's audience, helping him mail out for this because it's not something he's really done before. And so he's got this audience, but he's never mailed this kind of thing out to them before. And so we switched to a more logical email provider to do this. And for the first 2,000 people, I basically helped him just mail out an invitation for the webinar. And that caused some problems because they were like, whoa, who's this? Like, what? It just basically caused some confusion because they're not used to getting that kind of email. And then the response was that, just not good at all, to be honest. And so for the rest of the list, as a comparison test, basically I sent them a warm-up email being like, hey, you're going to start getting these kinds of emails, and it's like free content, and it's just whether you like it or not, and you can unsubscribe if you want. But basically, this is the new way he's going to mail you stuff, because again, I was helping him with this. And sending that first and warming them up and getting the expectation of like, okay, who is this? Why are they contacting you? What are they going to be sending you? And then actually sending them the exact same email. It worked 10 times as well. And there was no complaints. I don't think there were hardly any unsubscribes at all. So big lesson learned there as well. And I think that's important if you're mailing out through affiliates, if you're mailing out through your own email list that you haven't maintained very well. There's a lot of different ways that applies. Lesson number 4 is that advertising for webinars doesn't always work. Sometimes, and I mean paid advertising, by the way, sometimes you have to rely on the manual hustle side of things, and often this can actually work a lot better, which is surprising sometimes. I spent a bunch of time setting up all the ad stuff, and of course that approach costs money, and there was little return for that. And of course, it could have worked really, really well and taken off. But the way it panned out is I spent a lot of time on this. I invested some money in it. Not a lot. I think it's like $120 so far in terms of ad spend. But the manual promotional efforts that I took later as a result of that not working very well, they're actually free and they worked a lot better, which I was kind of surprised to find. So sometimes it's as simple as sharing a Facebook event page for a webinar in Facebook groups. And that works really well. Go figure. At the end of the day, it's just trying lots of things and doubling down on what works. Lesson number 5. So the final core takeaway is that you should definitely have a couple of people whose opinion you trust to bounce ideas off of through these kinds of big projects and important timelines. And this is true even if you're a solopreneur, because this is massively helpful from a psychological standpoint for overcoming uncertainty and hesitating. For example, as I mentioned before, I have a friend and a very smart guy who's really good with Facebook stuff that I'm kind of going to for help in that area because I'm not a Facebook ads expert. I'm decent. I know how to set them up and stuff. But in terms of key decision making, I don't know enough about it because I'm not an expert in that area. And so having somebody to go to ask those questions, to get unstuck was really, really important and prevented me from wasting a lot of times Googling random things about Facebook when things went wrong. And this applies in all areas. So having trusted advisors has just really been key. All right, so the next step is to get people on the webinar and see what happens. The original goal was to try and get 100 people on the webinar that's actually attending, not just registered. And this is very ambitious considering the context, because I don't have a 30,000 person email list or anything like that. But I'll definitely have that many people registered. I'll definitely have over 100 people registered, and I'll cross my fingers that most of them attend. A lot of times the number is thrown around, something like a third of people who register actually attend, but I'm hoping to push that up with some things I've got planned. So this is the middle of phase 3, the relaunch of a course launch process. And I'll give you guys an update after the launch with further lessons learned, as I'm sure there will be many. And then after that, it's on to phase 4, which is creating the systems and sales funnels to create consistent sales every month for a course, as well as creating a steady stream of prospects for other offerings that you have in your business, and also growing your audience every single month. So thanks again for listening, and stay tuned for further episodes about this course launch. And in the meantime, if you want to learn specific tactics to use for your own course launch, just go to grantweherley.com/webinar, or also myepodcast.com/webinar if you can't spell my last name, to check out a webinar on how to build and launch your own course in 4 to 8 hours. So basically, some of the nitty-gritty details of how to actually go through this process yourself. As always, thanks again for listening. Hey entrepreneurs and experts, I just wanted to thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you learned at least one new big idea that helps you evolve your skills and gets you closer to monetizing your expertise and creating that successful knowledge business. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on iTunes and Stitcher, and check out myepodcast.com for all episodes as well as the tips and tricks mentioned in this episode. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.